Jacksonville, the child was born who couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts. Poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. Hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefoot history, this land of flowers.
From WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network, the week that was, the 4th of January 2020 edition, a Boston Red here in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. An interesting week, much more so than what we've had in December, in that the realm of foreign policy is now in vogue. We've come a long way, as I say, from various other targeted killings back to Patrice Lumumba. He was in the Congo. He was assassinated. The corporate press now uses the word assassinated to describe the murder of General Soleimani in Baghdad. He was a principal commander in the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, one of their special units equivalent basically to Delta Force. His assassination and the emotional impact that is caused in Iran. His body was returned there, and they are having the official funeral, the beginning of 3 days of mourning. What does this mean to the U.S.? Well, basically what it means is when you have an assassination type foreign policy, you've seen it before with the assassination of the late Colonel Gaddafi, the leader of Libya. But it was handled in a different situation under the administration of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. They called it a liberation struggle, a different situation in that Colonel Gaddafi was killed in Libya. But this time, General Soleimani was actually killed in Baghdad, in the country that the American government has spent billions of dollars since the early 2000s. Actually, it extends from the administration of the first President Bush onward. That what we had was a war, a number of wars, the war in Iraq and in Afghanistan, in all ended up costing the American economy $6 trillion was spent on military matters. That's a lot of money. If you look at the total U.S. economy now is about 20 trillion, I say million trillion, and 18 trillion. So in other words, a little less, I should say, than a third of the American economy was spent on military matters. Now that in itself is, if you use the old accounting method, that was an out and not an input charge to the deficit and the American taxpayers. Thus we had demonstrations from Boston to Los Angeles to Albuquerque, New Mexico, to Kansas City, to Nashville, Tennessee, and places in between. The anti-war movement, as it's traditionally been called, has been activated. For those of us that remember the demonstrations that developed around the conflict in Vietnam, the demonstrations were small at first, and they became more numerous and much larger than the big demonstration at the Pentagon. That was one that John Kerry was in. So when you start to have these types of situations going on, people become increasingly mobilized. And this is a presidential year. Various candidates for the Democratic pot campaigning in Iowa. Joe Lunchbox Biden basically said that he supports Wilsonian foreign policy. General Soleimani was a bad actor, but at the same time he basically said the U.S. Must protect its assets and citizens. And Bernie Sanders has said it's not a good, I should rephrase that, not a good policy to be following. And DJ Trump chimes in that there are 54 targets, cultural targets that are important to the Iranians. That is something you really don't want to get into when you start dealing with cultural things. In fact, it is forbidden under international law from targeting cultural assets, because you're getting into something that causes not only military damage or economic loss, but cultural loss. For instance, if you bomb a Shiite shrine or whatever there, and then you inflame religious hostility throughout the region where Shiites are, and there are many, many Shiites around the Mideast. So you effectively have widened your conflict, if that is your intended goal. So thus, the whole situation is now from London to Washington and other capitals in Paris. They are looking at this, and the military people, the governments are trying to figure out, will this thing expand? And now the only question is, and this has been a history of wars, particularly the wars in Afghanistan and in Iraq. What comes next? Is there a plan? In other words, if you widen the war and get engaged in a hot war, and from recent experience we understand that those so-called hot wars don't end in 90 days. They can drag on into years, and if you expand your battlefield, it would really depend on which nation it would pop up in. Will that be in Saudi Arabia? Would it be in some of the other countries there? Would it be in Kuwait? Would the Israelis get involved in it? In other words, you could have a Mid-East region-wide war that could go on for years. What the U.S. plan is basically bombing. Well, bombing never solved anything. So now you get troops on the ground. Well, if you get troops on the ground, and what is their purpose? They're guarding U.S. facilities now. The training in Iraq has been suspended because obviously there is a problem of guarding the U.S., guarding their own troops, and various support personnel. And they're dealing with Iranian soldiers there. And once again, as happened in Vietnam, there are many of these people that are patriotic, in other words, Iranian patriots, that would fall in particularly with the cultural targeted. And then what you have is basically a crossfire from right and from left. You have Iranian troops firing on American troops, and then you have the various militias firing also. And effectively what happens is what happens in Vietnam. It becomes untenable, and the Americans would be leaving Baghdad. They would just be simply gone. It would become too dangerous to be there. And that could very well happen. In Iran, there is no American embassy there anymore. Well, it's a building, but no Americans in it. So that could immediately change the course of events in that area and make much of the rest of that region not travelable. In fact, there's warnings out now for American nationals to leave many of the countries, and they haven't really started the conflict. The DJ Trump planners obviously trying to up the sweepstakes. It's not a way to run a war unless you have a solution that you can bring it to an end. In other words, the old idea is that you send in bombers, missiles, and now, of course, drones more so, and you bomb. Well, that happened in the first, and President George H. Bush didn't go to Baghdad, he left. And GW decided that they would bomb, and they did. But yet they got tied down in that war, and eventually they were able to assassinate and murder Saddam Hussein. But the problems continue. That is why they are there today. The country is divided up. The government, the central government in Baghdad is weak. And if you look at Libya there, the central government there is just sort of propped up. General Haftar is marching forces from the east. They had some bombings today. 30 people were killed. And that will be the order of business. The only question is, how will it affect the U.S., if at all? Now, if you get into a situation where petrol supplies are impeded or knocked out, not Iran, because Iran has such sanctions on it, they are not delivering any product to the U.S. They are delivering some to Europe, but some of that capacity could be out, and of course you have Venezuela that is out. And the only difference is now than what you had in the 70s and 80s is you have an industry in the U.S. in fracking, and this could help those particular or that particular product, in that there'd be more reliance on it, and many of those companies that are bankrupt, on the verge of bankruptcy, would be re-energized, and that would change how things are done. It would change how OPEC is done. And how does that affect the Russian Federation, for one, and various other suppliers that are not in the Mideast of petrol to the world? If the price, of course, goes up, that benefits the Russian Federation. But that's a question also, because the Russian Federation borders Iran, and what will it do? What will China do? There are a lot of wild cards out there, and this thing, it appears, is not thought out. They did, as a matter of law, the Trump administration deliver, under the War Powers Act, a certificate to the Congress, a classified certificate of why they did this. So it really doesn't matter to the American public. There may be some things that come out saying that General Soleimani was plotting attacks. Well, the way that military planners do it, he wasn't plotting attacks in his sleep or in his rocking chair. There are records, and other functionaries of his military command, they know about this, if that was supposedly plotted, and corrections to it will no doubt be made. So is this going to be a short-term conflict or long-term conflict? The way the Trump administration is pushing this, they are pushing for more of a long-term conflict. So that is where the policy is at this point in time. A lot of press coverage of it is going on. But what will the Iranians do? Some say, well, it'll be asymmetrical. They do stuff like cyber attacks, etc. Maybe, maybe not. There are many places in the world that could be attacked, and of course not only the Iranians are involved in this, but other militias that are aligned with them or sympathetic to them could also attack. So it's a wild card. And business is creating more uncertainty. Brexit at the end of this month, January. The EU will be officially leaving, so that's another question mark out there. The big question is the U.S., how much shock can the U.S. economy stand? You have the futures market now fluctuating. Petrol was up $3 a barrel, which is not very much. But if that were to continue on, and with consumers now taking more of a dim view of the American economy, a recession could result. We'll have more on numbers, man, about where that could be going. There was a survey out from the Philadelphia Fed talking about some of the states that have some problems, including Wisconsin and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We'll have more of that on that particular program. We'll have in the next day or so we'll have an open source report for 2020, where we'll talk about 2020 and where 2020 is going. So I was just looking at a statement here by the Defense Secretary Esper, saying that General Soleimani was actively developing plans to attack American diplomats and service members. So in other words, that is some of the justification that is out there. And Joe Biden said that basically DJ Trump is tossed a stick of dynamite into a tinder box. He owes the American people an explanation of the strategy. Well, the problem is that you can't explain that type of strategy, because over the years that was something that was looked at as something that is against international law. And when you get into that, that was something that the Hillary Clinton regime was into, the assassination of people. That is the age-old argument that people themselves, one person, is very important to an issue. And I'm just looking at this LA Times, from Afghanistan to Lebanon to Yemen to Syria. And so, in other words, these different groups here and the different Shiite militias here and Hezbollah and etc. Period. So General Soleimani is gone, but I guess the question to ask here is his legacy, because he's moved from being a general to a martyr, and that does mean something. And then you throw in the whole idea of these culturally sensitive assets that he wants to bomb. The Taliban in Afghanistan has followed a similar course of action, destroying many so-called religious or holy sites. Not unusual there, and of course the situation continues on. So that is the big question there as we move closer and closer to the Iowa political event, and that will be on the 3rd of February. And of course, after the 3rd of February, on the 4th of February, the 4th, 5th, you'll get the results, and Iowa will go dark. And then it's on to New Hampshire. They'll have their day in the light, so to speak. And as soon as the New Hampshire primary, that'd be the first primary, is over, the TV lights will be turned out. They'll move on to Nevada, and then from Nevada on to South Carolina. And then we get ready for the big one, as they say, March the 3rd. What effect this particular situation will have? Well, events have basically moved from Des Moines, Iowa to Tehran. And what the people in Tehran decide to do, the supreme leader has said they will respond. And they always have a history of doing exactly what they say they're going to do. So this is where the foreign policy rests. On the other sector, in terms of voter suppression, the Census Bureau is now getting data from the Homeland Security people, and they will be supplying this. The whole idea there is a Republican consultant said that it would suppress the vote of non-European people. So in other words, the voter suppression is already out there. If you create a situation that the people have papers and which people do not have the proper papers, and then at the same time, the fear factor, you will be able to scare some people off. So that is also part of the program. There are a lot of machinations going on here. The right is fighting very, very hard, and we'll just have to wait and see. Another story here reports that, passports actually once scanned are the latest problem in the quest for real ID driver license. They're looking at this as a California driver's license here, the quest for real ID, the federally compliant driver's license that can be used as identification by air travelers to board flights. That starts on the 1st of October. The domestic flights has hit another bump. The passport that might try to use as proof of your identity in the application process sometime is rejected. In other words, that is one of the identity papers you can use to get the real ID, supposedly. And another problem technical glitch, as one would say. And where do you go with the technical glitch? Well, we don't know. I guess is the answer there. This means the U.S.-born citizens in California and elsewhere might rely on original or certified birth certificates to apply. And if you are married or choose to have your spouse's name, or you must also have a marriage certificate and the birth certificate, period. And of course, if you have a current passport, you won't need a real ID to board the plane. Just use your passport, and that will be the end of it. Other forms of ID global include a passport card, a global entry, nexus, and so forth and so on can be used. There are different types of identification, and a system known as U.S. Passport Verification System provides a pass-fail verification of U.S. passports. Some records can be verified there. When constituents' records can't be verified, he or she may be informed by state office, DMV, and states. The passport can't be used to obtain the real ID. State Department said is owned by Association of American Motor Vehicle Administrators through a partnership with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. But at this moment, there is no fix. The road to the real ID license has been littered with problems in California and elsewhere. The license is part of legislation that grew out of a 911 commission. California began issuing licenses in 2018. More than 2.3 million licenses have been issued by early fall of this year. The method of verifying proof of residency didn't comply with federal standards after previously saying the methods were fine. Wisconsin also was caught in that issue, so it's just more than one particular situation. In spring of 2019, those early adopters received or should have received letters from the California Authority asking them to re-verify their home addresses. In the fall of 2019, a survey released by the U.S. Travel Association showed more than 70% of Americans either don't know what Real ID is or aren't sure whether they have one. The Real ID license has a gold bear and a white star in the upper corner. It works with various organizations to spread that. An estimated 80,000 people could be denied boarding and result in more than $40 million lost in spending. So these are some things that go on here. We thought we would report this and move on. One of the big issues that is in many, many states, if you don't have the tools, you can't move out there. On Friday Java, we reported the passing of Don Larson. And I remember in our little thing there, I think, I spelled his name Larson. It's E-N. He was, anyway, nonetheless, well, we'll have to deal with that later. And let me see, this is from the New York Times here. See if we can grab another story here. I think we already grabbed it. Yeah, we did. The crisis of Aboriginal women. We covered so we covered it on a previous broadcast. You have to separate out what we did and what we didn't do. And see exactly where we are here. Some more of the campaign fundraising. This is from the Washington Post. Campaign fundraising hails solidifies Democratic leaders as Trump continues to amass his campaign fortune over, I believe, $100 million a year. Large sums scooped up by Democrats, of course, in the final months. Bernie Sanders scooped up $35 million plus. At the same time, Trump brought in his biggest haul ever last quarter as the impeachment issue there. Re-election committee produced an outpouring of $46 million. Traditionally, incumbents raise more money than candidates. But of course, again, this is a primary and has to be divided up amongst the Democratic candidates. And now the Trump campaign has $100 million to spend. In all, the Democratic presidential candidates raised $118 million in the last quarter. That's quite a bit of money. And you have these candidates out there, and there will be obviously more of this money being out there still to figure on the scores. The unsettled nature of the Democratic primary fight, while it highlights Trump's success in stockpiling millions of dollars. And Mayor Petey from South Bend, I think he's at $24.7 million. VP Biden, former VP Biden, is at $22.7 million. So they're up there. Elizabeth Warren raised $17 million. Amy Klobuchar, I believe, was $11 million. Was her best campaign fundraising situation there. And of course, the mayor from El Paso, Julian Castro, dropped out of the race there because obviously he could not raise the money. Andrew Yang had $16.5 million from the Yang Gang. And even Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii raised $3.4 million, not bad at all. And according to this article from the Post, Mayor Petey and Biden have benefited from the departure of Kamala Harris, picking up high-profile, wealthy supporters. You'd expect that to happen. and Bernie Sanders was up about $12 million in his fundraising, because those candidates are very, very similar, and that has been a big problem there. Period. His grassroots fundraising operation even draws acknowledgement from some of the president's backers. Bernie's cash is real. That is from Byron Lanza, an advisor on the Trump 2016 campaign. Sanders has experienced a resurge. They've talked about a resurge there since his heart attack. Bernie is back. Medicare for all is alive and well. 4 weeks left until voting begins. Actually, a little less than that now. Bernie is now focusing heavily there, hoping for a victory, at least a top-tier finish, preferably ahead of Warren and Biden. He's nearly topped Hillary Clinton in Iowa 4 years ago. It was stolen from Bernie 4 years ago. He was one of several candidates with a realistic chance of winning the caucus. His campaign drew 300,000 new donors in the fourth quarter and surpasses a $5 million contribution from many donors who would give repeatedly. And no doubt about that. What has happened with Bernie, that many of the Bernie supporters had been holding back for external situations, their own financial well-being, nonetheless of supporting Bernie. There are two ways, obviously, more than two ways of supporting Bernie. Financially, attending his rallies in various states, propagandizing for Bernie. Very important to keep Bernie's name in the news, because the corporate media has tried to put Bernie out of the news. And this is one of the situations that $10-20 contributions are there. Now, Biden, again, establishment anxiety, and Biden's super PAC, Unite the Country, donors are committing to helping the campaign early states. The group has spent so far $2 million in Iowa. Well, no doubt there's anxiety there, and expectations, period. And this is something I had not finished up this article. As of New Year's Day, Mayor Petey is no longer the mayor of South Bend, freeing up more time he can be out there. So now we don't have to call him Mayor Petey. We can just call him Petey. And in this article, former mayor is now poised to rake in more money from donors in the financial community who already welcomed his candidacy, period. As mayor, he was limited by a federal pay-to-play contribution cap on bankers' donations to local and state leaders oversee public pension funds. So now they can honor him. Bloomberg has already spent $100 million on ads alone. Of course, he's skipping those first four states, period. Trump campaign has hired more than 400 as staffers, plans to eventually hire 1,500 spread across 300 offices in 17 states that they are focusing on. The president's re-election campaign has spent more than $100 million in digital ads, added more online donors in 2019 than 2017, 2018. That's according to them. You'll hear this going on there. Digital ads, a lot of it is the game. Grassroots support is unprecedented. As from this guy Lanza, he's a former advisor. The opposition to our agenda is unprecedented. It will take unprecedented resources to level the playing field. So they say. So in other words, that is part of what is going on. Let me see if I can get this up here. We had not included this in any of our reports. Now, this is from Just Security. It has been redacted exclusively here. Clear directed from Trump to continue the whole. What Michael Duffy, Associate Director of National Security Programs, that's at the Office of Management Budget, known as OMB, told Elaine McCusker the acting Pentagon controller in a August 30th email, which had been made available in a redacted form until now. It's one of many documents the Trump administration is trying to keep from the public. Despite congressional oversight efforts, court orders from the Freedom of Information Act in the early day on the 30th, DJ Trump met with Esper, he's the defense secretary, and Pompeo to discuss the president's hold on $391 million in military assistance for Ukraine. Inside the Trump administration, panic was reaching fever pitch about the president's funding hole, which had stretched on for 2 months. Days earlier, Politico had broken the story, and questions were starting to pile up. Defense contractors were worried about delayed contracts, and officials in Kiev, that's spelled K-Y-I-V, proper spelling of translation. Anyway, lawmakers on Capitol Hill wanted to know what on earth was going on. Trump's national security team thought the whole lot of money went against U.S. security interests. Thanks to the testimony of several Trump officials, we now know what Trump was waiting on, a commitment from Ukraine to investigate Joe Lunchbox Biden. But getting at the truth or the facts had not been easy, and the Trump administration continues to try to obstruct it. It blocked key officials from testifying. It's keeping documentary evidence from lawmakers investigating the Ukraine story. For example, notes from Duffrey to McClusker was never turned over to White House investigators, and the Trump administration continued to try to keep it secret. Last month, with court order, the government released almost 300 pages of emails to the Public Center for Integrity in response to a lawsuit. It released the first batch on December 12th and the second installment on December 20th, including Duffrey's email, but that document, along with several others, were parts that are completely blacked out, the old goose pen. Since then, Just Security has viewed unredacted copies of these emails, which began in June and ended in October. Now we get more of the actual story. Together they tell the behind-the-scenes defense and budget officials who carried out the president's unexplained hold on military to Ukraine. Documents reveal growing concern from the Pentagon officials that the hold would violate the Impoundment Control Act, which requires the executive branch to spend money as appropriated by Congress, and that necessary steps to avoid this result weren't being taken. These steps, which included notifying Congress that the funding was being withheld, are shipped elsewhere, a step that was never taken. The emails also show that no rationale was given for either why the hold was put in place or why it was eventually lifted. What is clear is that it all came down to the president and what he wanted. No one else appears to have supported his position. Although the pretext of the hold was some sort of policy review was taking place, the emails made no mention that actually happened. Instead, officials were anxiously waiting for the president to be convinced the hold was a bad idea. And while the situation continued through the summer, senior defense officers were searching for legal guidelines, whether they would be blamed should the hold be lifted too late to actually spend all the money, which had been a violation of law. The emails also revealed key defense points, moments when senior officials hoped the hold might be lifted. They included the Vice President Pence in a September meeting with the Ukrainian President Zelensky, which a senior official expected would resolve the funding issue, raising questions why what was supposed to come out of the meeting would pave the way for Trump to lift the hold. Question mark there. Pence expected to communicate, but the hold wasn't immediately lifted after the meeting. Instead, the president finally released the money on the 11th of September, just as a whistleblower complaint was about to break into the open. And as the story began in mid-June, when the Defense Department officials first heard the president question Ukrainian money, and we go to a report from the New York Times. On the 19th of June, Robert Blair, he's a senior advisor to the acting White House chief Mulvaney, called Russell Vaughn. He testified, the acting head of OMB, we need to hold it up in reference to the Ukrainian aid. The same day, Michael Defray, the Associate Director of National Security Programs at emailed Elaine McCrusher. She's a career civil servant who served as acting Pentagon controller, about a Washington Times story of the $250 million the Defense Department had just announced it was sending there. The president had asked about the funding release and had been asked to follow up with someone over there to get more details. Then we get Mark Sandy, the Deputy Associate Director for National Security at OMB. It was a copied email and told the White House House Intelligence Committee that he remembered receiving it and being made aware that the president had questioned Ukrainian funding. Laura Cooper, who oversees Ukrainian policy at DOD, testified to the House Intelligence Committee. The president wanted to know if U.S. companies would provide Ukraine with any equipment and what other countries were doing to contribute and where the U.S. funding came from. The State Defense Department collected the answers and sent them back up the food chain. Interesting. They explained that the vast majority of companies providing equipment were American. They were told the White House that the UK, Canada, Lithuania, and Poland all contributed military training equipment to the Ukraine, and that the European Union also provided an enormous amount of economic support. As for the third question, it was the trickiest to answer because of a strange paraphrasing. Cooper said the office answer: the money came from Congress and it had strong bipartisan support. Questions didn't stop there. Blair wanted to know the status of the funding, meaning was the money out of the door already? Only $7 million of the $250 million had been obligated to date. That's McCrutcher. An attachment showed the equipment the money was going to buy, including counter artillery radar, sniper rifles, grenade launchers, secure communication, cyber support, night vision, Humvees, and medical equipment. Also listed U.S. company expects to supply them. According to the Times, Blair emailed Mulvaney, telling him the Ukrainian money could be held, but to expect Congress to become unhinged. Given the sensitive nature of the requests, hours after Trump concluded his infamous July 25th call with Zelensky, during which he asked to investigate the former Vice President Biden, Defray sent an email to top senior officials at the Defense Department, which was released to the Center for Public Integrity. The letter advised the Pentagon to suspend any further aid to Ukraine. Based upon guidance I've received and in light of the administration's plan to review assistance to Ukraine, including the Ukraine Assistance Initiative, please hold off on any additional DOD obligations of these funding spending direct from that process. I understand that DOD will continue its planning and casework during this period, and that the brief pause in the obligation will preclude DOD's timely execution. We intend to formalize the pause with an apportionment footnote to be provided later. Given the sensitive nature of the request, I appreciate you keeping this information closely held to those who need to know. Please let me know if you have any questions. She followed up with an email to, this is McCrutcher, to the OMB, asking if they had gone through the Defense Department's General Counsel, indicating earlier concern about legality action. When it was released, this email to the Center for Public Integrity, Department of Justice, redacted this simple question from McClusker. It was on the 25th that Sandy implemented the first hold on the Ukrainian funding by inserting a footnote in the budget document. This hold extended through August the 5th. The Pentagon made clear that the first phase would not jeopardize its ability to spend the money by the end of fiscal year. The next day, on the 26th, Joe Rood, R-O-O-D, head of the policy that the Defense Department sent his boss, Esper, a readout form from Ukraine Deputy's Small Working Group meeting. This is a meeting convened by the National Security Council, which we know, thanks to Cooper's congressional testimony, that the national security community voiced unanimous support for resuming the funding. And Cooper raised the Defense Department's concern about the urgency of the matter due to the legal requirements to spend all the money by the end of the fiscal year. The readout indicates a line which makes it clear that the hold on defense and State Department funding came at the President's direction. The OMB noted that the President directed via the Chief of Staff in early July to suspend security aid to Ukraine, including by blocking $115 million foreign aid, finance, and congressional notification, by holding execution of $250 million, that is in FY19. An assistant to Esper let officials know the Secretary had read the summary of the meeting and had no further questions. At the beginning of August, the Defense Department told the OMB, the White House, its concerns about legality of the hold, and now the clock ticked towards the end. The fiscal year ended in September, and it would become increasingly difficult for the Pentagon to spend the money in time. It wasn't all spent by December 30th. In violation of law, the money would be returned to the U.S. Treasury in what is known as impoundment. While pressure mounted as the month began, the red lines had not yet been crossed, but it would soon be. Duffray sent McClusker an email telling her he planned to extend the hold on Ukraine funding by reinserting the same footnote into the budget document. The footnote still noted that the pause would not prevent the Department of Defense from spending the money before the end of the fiscal year if the hold was lifted. McCluskey wrote back asking to whom Duffray spoke to confirm that the additional pause would not affect all the execution. Good catch, Duffy wrote back, and then asked with whom he should check in. And this is a back and forth between McCluskey sent to Senior on the 9th of August. OMB officials, including Sandy and Duffray, as we discussed it on the 12th. I don't think we can agree that the poise will not preclude timely execution. We hope it won't, and we'll do all we can to execute once a policy decision is made. The Pentagon warning: we are running out of time. Justice Department chose to black this out when releasing the email. So this is some things here. We'll put this on the program note. Duffray followed up with a number of questions, mostly on whether the money could be shifted to other programs if the decision was made not to spend it on Ukraine. McCluskey told him that reprogramming was possible, but it was very unlikely to get approval from Congress, because Congress had not only approved the Pentagon's request for the $200 million for Ukraine military assessment, but an additional $250 million, indicating that bipartisan support for the program was overwhelming. On the 12th of August, understanding that the hold on Ukraine funding was going to extend again, McCluskey sent Duffray proposed language to be included in the next footnote. A lot of footnotes going on here, based on the OMB's communications with DOD, on the 12th of August 2019. OMB understands from the department that this additional poise in obligations may not preclude DOD from timely executing the final policy decision, but that the execution risk increases with continual delays, emphasis added. But the next time the hold was extended, the footnote did not include any text that indicated the growing risk to funding. The language that the Department of Defense thought should be included was also redacted in a document publicly released last month. The email showed what's supposed to be the August 16th meeting between Pompeo, the Secretary of Minister of Defense, and Esper at the president's New Jersey golf resort. And we're discussing it there. Media reports show that Trump met with his national security team that day at Bedmaster to discuss Afghanistan. And for those talks, they had also Pence, the vice president, John Bolton, when he was still there, Dufford, and the CIA director, Jenny Hasper. They were all there. Well, there was an exclamation that it would be on the day's agenda, an email from Duffrey to McClusker said it sounds like Ukraine was not discussed. As the month wore on, if the emails show officials bending over backwards to make any conceivable accommodation to keep the process moving without actually being able to obtain the funds. Well, this sounds like a soap opera. The idea was that as soon as the funds were given, the green light would be zero delay. But tensions began to build between the Defense Department and the Office of Management Budget towards the end of August as the funding hole complicated all contractual processes that need to take place in order to buy equipment for Ukraine. The Defense Department micromanaged it down to the lowest level. The field contracting offices, they had a lot of issues going on here. They issued another footnote, more footnotes that did not include language flagging the growing risk. On the 21st, emails to her colleagues, McClusker noted that members of the House Appropriation Committee traveled to Ukraine earlier that month and sent the Pentagon a request for more information. Duffrey let McClusker know that the funding hole was being extended. That was on August 26th. To which Duffrey replied, "I'm not tracking that. This is something you're expecting from OMB. Yes, it was now necessary. Legal teams were discussing last week. Justice Department redacted that. More redactions. Email to Duffrey later in the morning. McClusker's frustration is palatable. For starters, the DoD hasn't gotten the footnote extending the hole, so technically the Pentagon should start obligating the money. Plus, someone else there named Mike Paletta, the counsel for the OMB, appears to continue to consistently misunderstand the process and the timelines we provide for funding execution. That's what he said. Again, the detail was redacted by the Trump administration. McClusker asked Duffrey, are you working with him? Can you help? The footnote had put the ability to execute at risk. She tells Duffrey that the Senate Armed Services Committee is now asking questions. On August 27th, Eric Schuing, that's Chief of Staff to Esper, shared with McClusker a 26 email he received from Harris Technology, one of the defense contractors waiting on the money. The companies learned of the hole and wanted to know what was going on. She responded, recognizing the importance of decision space, but this situation is really unworkable, particularly difficult because OMB's lawyers continue to consistently mischaracterize the process. And the information has been provided. Of course, again, more redactions here. Frustration mounted. Pentagon considered ratcheting up its warning, preparing a draft letter for the Deputy Defense Secretary, somebody by the name of Norquist, to Vaughn. Vaughn testified. Remember his testimony. McClusker shared the letter with Duffrey on the 27th there. Here are some key sections. As you know, in a series of footnotes to its apportionment document, the Office of Management Budget has directed the department to poise its obligation of funding temporarily pending the completion of an interagency process to determine the best use of such funds. As a result, we repeat the advise the OMB officials that the poise on the 19th of August jeopardize the department's ability to obligate the funds, and fully consistent with the empowerment Impoundment Controlled Act. A new footnote was signed by the Fray later that day, extending the hold yet again. In the meantime, after weeks of trying to keep the president's hold on Ukrainian money within a tight circle of administrative henchmen, my word, not theirs, the word of it was getting out. It has now reached Capitol Hill and defense contractors and officials in Ukraine. On the 28th, it burst into the open when Politico broke their story. Somebody talked. Talking points were hashed out, and the general counsel at the OMB followed them around. The final talking point read, no action has been taken by OMB that would preclude the obligation of these funds before the end of the fiscal year. That would be September 30th. When McCluster read this, she wrote to the FA, I don't agree to the revised TP. The last one is just not accurate from a financial execution standpoint. We've been consistently conveying for a few weeks. The talking point was also discussed internally in the Defense Department. McCluster told a group of senior officials the OMB continues to ignore our repeated explanation regarding how the process worked. And in the draft memo to the OMB director, although we will proceed to take all necessary preparatory steps, please be advised that we can no longer confirm that the funding will be fully and prudently obligated before the expiration on the 30th of September. This is due to OMB action, I'm sure, and I'm missing some nuances here. On the 30th, after the meeting with the president took place, the Fray told McClusker, that clear direction from Pontus to hold. Meanwhile, Turing told senior officials that Esper had told him, but no decision came from the meeting with Trump. The news that another extension was coming, McCluster emailed Turing, I suppose how you pronounce his name. Do you believe DOD is adequately protected from what would happen as a result of Ukrainian obligation? Poise, I realize we need to continue to give the White House much decision space as possible. And this goes on and on and on here, and let me just get to the last of this mess. So finally, on the 11th of September, again, Dufresne emailed McCluster to tell her the hold is lifted. When asked him why, he responded, not exactly clear, but the president made the decision to go. Will you fill us in when I get the details? With the hold listed, McCluster's team worked fast to get the money out the door, but in the end, 35.2 million of Ukrainian funding lapsed and required new congressional legislation, make it available. Glad to have this behind us, he told McClusker. So anyway, I guess the bottom line is all the money did not get out the door, and we'll put this on. This obviously is a very long and very complicated redaction process, many footnotes, and it's helpful here. The organization justsecurity.org made this available through the people at the Integrity Project there, and they were able to put this out and get the redacted amounts there, and you'll see in the enclosure what was redacted. I mean, much of the information was redacted, but fortunately we still have some access here to what is going on. I mean, it is my old friend the late Jeannie Lyles would say, it is a mess. So do we go from one apocalyptic movement to another apocalyptic movement? Difficult to say what happens here with this new situation, the assassination, and what was given there. There's been a pattern of action by this administration of going forward with bluster and with propaganda and various other things there. Linguistic jigsaw. That the actual facts, the facts and fiction get in a blurred line, and you have problems. Now, on these top flight stories that have regional implication in the Mideast, like the assassination of General Soleimani, you have situations that are long going. And as the Trump administration is now dealing with monuments, whatever, cultural items of significant importance to, we're assuming, Shiites, the Iranian people, and Shiites by extension, you're just widening your conflict. And many times just the so-called, we'll call this a threat, actually the so-called impending action itself will get the results. Because many people will interpret it and as a completed action, period. A fait accompli was the word I wanted to get there. So thus we have a situation that the anti-war movement is now taken on, as in the Vietnam War. But at least in Vietnam, they had more of a clear type of situation out there. Let me just finish with one other Post article here. This is from the New York Post. So just get the headline in. In a major escalation, Americans strike to kill top Iranian commander in Baghdad. So this in itself is very, very interesting. This is by Musfa Salon. There and various others. The strike, of course, we talked about that. The strike there and how it is a major escalation. No doubt about that. From the Ayatollah Ali Khomeini said that Soleimani's death was bitter, but the final victory will make life more bitter for the murderers and criminals. So we'll see. In other words, you get into something like this. The Deputy Defense Minister Hatami added that the attack would be met with crushing response. So again, you have people on the record here, the Prime Minister on the record. A video circulated by Shiite militias showed accompanied by sounds of wailing, etc. there, wreckage of vehicles in which the general was traveling. A photograph claimed to show the bloodiest ash-colored hand wearing the same bloody red ring seen in early photos of him alive. So again, they actually have the body out there that inflames. Even more people had not seen this before here, and various religious situations going on here. Iran will seek revenge, and it may escalate in Iraq, Lebanon, anywhere around. That is some warning from somebody named Goldberg, is now a scholar at the Center for New American Security. Unfortunately, I highly doubt that the administration has thought through the next step. Well, we don't know, but this is kind of an interesting situation that we just don't know. What we do know is military planners constantly plan all kinds of scenarios. These are pre-planned situations in modern military planning. And it's a situation here that there's so many targets, and from, let's see who it is, Mark Paulopoulos, a former CIA type, for legitimacy of the Iranian regime. A forceful response against the U.S. should be expected. The American public need to understand that we may lose American lives after this act. No doubt about that. A lot of tit for tat there. Airstrikes appear to have set in motion. Some rocket attacks there, city of Kirkuk. This is all over the place, and you have American advisors there and in that area, where will they be exposed and not exposed. But it goes a lot beyond that. The 82nd Airborne Summer Deployment, 750 troops from a special quick action platoon of the 82nd Airborne to Kuwait, staging ground forces for going into Iraq. About 100 Marines were sent to Baghdad to protect the embassy. About 5,000 troops were stationed in Iraq as part of an effort to combat the remnants of the Islamic State. What they're up to during this, who knows? I mean, it's just a mess. Period here. Where it goes from here, people really don't know. Oil prices jumped. We talked about petrol, about 1.2. It actually went up. Brent crude, usually about 3% there. But again, jumping as much, and this is on the New York actually Mercantile Exchange, about as much as 4%. That'll be now for February delivery. So you effectively will see that at the pump as it goes on here. We'll end the report here. It took a little longer. Sorry about that. This is Boston Red and the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you on the Monday Morning Quarterback. You can find us on Stitcher, their mobile app, on iHeart, their mobile app, radio, media, whatever you want to call it, on Twitter, on YouTube. We're all around the place there, on Spotify. So you have many outlets to find our podcasts, and hopefully they are all consistent together.